liked the UK not to make a decision until the full reports concerning the crash has been published.
Today, after U.S. and British officials share their intelligence, Russian President Vladimir Putin made the bold announcement that Russia is suspending all flights to Egypt. Officials in Egypt continue to push back, saying it is still too early to know what caused the crash.
Pamela Brown joins us now. So we understand you just got some new information about the so-called chatter from ISIS.
That's right. We've learned who was on the receiving end of that chatter, Anderson, and apparently, according to sources we've been speaking with, it was ISIS in Syria. So intelligence officials were able to pick up communications between ISIS and the Sinai Peninsula, this affiliate of ISIS, and essentially the mothership, ISIS and Syria. And apparently ISIS in the Sinai Peninsula was boasting about the bomb, boasting about bringing down the plane. But intelligence officials I've been speaking with say this has been inconclusive because they don't know if it was an attempt by this active ISIS branch in the Sinai Peninsula to gain favor with the mothership, to try to impress them when in fact they weren't really behind anything with the plane crash. However, it is serious enough for officials here in the U.S. and as we've heard in Great Britain and elsewhere to say a bombing is a strong possibility. And now we've learned as a result of this intelligence and perhaps other factors, Russia has now stopped flights to Europe. So it is concerning, but again, Anderson, there have been no conclusions.
You mean stop flights to Egypt?
Stop flights to Egypt,
Right.
That's right.
Okay, Pamela
Yes.
Brown, thank you for the reporting of that update. I appreciate it. We've just learned that some of the extra security measures we spoke about at the top of the broadcast will be instituted at airports in Cairo, Oman, Jordan, and Kuwait. A lot to talk about with the panel. CNN aviation correspondent Richard Quest, CNN safety analyst and former FAA accident investigator David Susi, also former CIA officer Bob Baer, and CNN terrorism analyst Paul Cruikshank. Richard, I mean, in the days up to now, people were saying, well, look, if this was a bomb planted on board this flight by someone who worked there, this is a game changer.
And it remains to be. If this was a bomb, we know it's an explosion, and everything points towards it being a bomb. And so let's continue our discussion, if you like, on that assumption. If it is a bomb that has been put on this plane, then all the planning that's gone into post 9/11 really goes for nothing when it comes to these weaker airports. And what the US authorities are going to have to do, along with the British and others, is go into these airports and systemically work out what's gone wrong and beef up the security. Otherwise, the alternative is very simple. You don't get direct flights to major countries.
What I don't understand, though, I mean, it's not as if the Egyptian government doesn't have a ton of military personnel and a ton of secret police. I mean, if they wanted to bolster security at their airports, they could bolster security at their airports.
Well, as I don't want to tread on the toes of my colleagues here, but I suspect what they're going to tell you is you can have all the security you like, but if some of them go bad, then you're in a worse situation than if you had nothing at all.
Paul, I mean, should it be that complicated to try to protect the back end of these planes, the ground crews who have access to them?
Well, if you've got an insider at the airport, that's a holy grail for a terrorist group. And ISIS in Sinai, just further to Richard's point, has a track record of recruiting insiders inside the Egyptian military, inside the Egyptian police. They carried out an attack in Cairo in 2014 where a senior police colonel actually gave them insider information. They have that kind of track record, so it is plausible that they did manage to recruit somebody at Sharm el-Sheikh airport. And there's concern now they've recruited other people at other airports in the Middle East. And I think that's one of the reasons why there are these new security precautions for certain airports in the Middle East coming into the United States.
Robert, the fact that the BBC is reporting the bomb was placed in the hold of the plane prior to takeoff. I mean, again, if an insider working the airport is there, in terms of security, where do you go from here?
Well, Anderson, the problem is these planes are essentially indefensible. I mean, you can take a couple ounces of a high brisance explosive, which is basically nothing. You can take a detonator the size of a pencil eraser, and have a device that can bring down an airplane. So, I mean, what do you do about the cleaning staff? I mean, someone could just simply come in and put this on the side in the overhead compartment, knock down an airplane. What do you do about, as Paul was saying, what do you do about the police that are supposed to be guarding it, and people have switched loyalties to the Islamic State? Egypt is a very dangerous place, and it's in the middle of an Islamic insurgency, and I just simply don't know how you defend an airplane and, secure it in Cairo, and that's why the Russians and KLM and everybody else are canceling flights to even Cairo. and you can't leave with your own luggage. I mean, people are very, very worried at this point because they don't know where the threat's coming from, and they don't know which airports are secure and which are.
So, David, Susie, in terms of the investigation, how do you narrow down the details on what sort of device this was, et cetera, unless you actually find remnants of the device?
Well, there's some telltale signs of what type of device it was that will be disclosed as they put the airplane back together. But how it got in there is the biggest key of all, and the system for that is where it needs to focus, and that's where even investigators will focus back there. Even before they know what it is, Anderson, they don't have to prove that it is a bomb to heighten security and to reevaluate their whole protocol of how they get this done. But as far as the investigation goes, what happens on site, they're going to be looking for the fracture point, the very first point at which the aircraft cracked. From there, you can look for debris, for residue, for even the smallest bomb, if you know where that first fracture point is, the place where it first started to crack.
But David, how big of a problem is it the fact that, I mean, from everything we know publicly, at least, Egyptian investigators haven't been investigating this as a terrorist incident? I mean, there were reports early on that they weren't interviewing people at the airport, ground staff at the airport, and at least publicly, they have not been out in front on this.
The damage has been done there, Anderson. That needs to be done right away. People's memories change, things change. There's videotapes that may or may not be accessible now that were when it first happened. There's a lot of lost information here by assuming, and you know, we talked before about why they waited to see. They kept telling Russia and they kept telling the Prime Minister, why don't we wait and see until the report's done? You can't do that in safety. You react right away. Safety is reactive to some extent. Then you learn from that and it becomes proactive. But in the meantime, you have to take those security measures and then dial them back if you have to. But the fact that they didn't do that right up front could be very damaging to the investigation.
Richard?
The game changer aspect when it comes to aviation and terrorism and this particular incident is the federated nature of ISIS or Al-Qaeda if they were in another scenario. In the past, you've had terrorist organizations very much related to a specific area with a specific cause and a specific goal and ambition. But this federated nature, where, just as you were saying, the chatter that's going backwards and forwards, the word that's going back to Syria or wherever it might be, this is what makes it much more difficult, because we are now dealing with something we haven't dealt with before on a larger scale, with more airports, and that's why the TSA's announcements tonight with the 10 individual airports is so crucial. And my guess is what's going to happen is the US, along with a few other countries, will go into those airports to actually see whether or not they can remain safe.
And Paul, I mean, again, it's not just people who are in the Middle East. I mean, you now have foreign fighters, people from Europe, even the United States, who have gone there to fight for ISIS, gain experience, and then can come back to Europe. And
absolutely right. 6,000 Europeans now believed to have gone and fought in Syria and Iraq for the variety of jihadi groups. 1,500, and I'll say that again, 1,500 believed to be back in Europe right now. Around 200 Americans believed to have traveled. President Putin the other day said around 7,000 individuals from Russia and the former Soviet states have traveled to fight in Syria and Iraq. Big threat for Russia as well. ISIS tonight promising more attacks and more attacks against Russian aviation.
So, Bob, where does it go from here in terms of trying to protect planes in the future?
We're going to have to clean up our airports, first of all. Minneapolis, there was an airport worker, worked for Delta Airlines, leaves Minneapolis, goes to Syria, dies. But the fact is he did work at that airport, and what's to stop somebody, instead of going to Syria, carrying the battle to Minneapolis? That's what concerns me, is our airports. These people are not vetted, and if they're not vetted, they can get bombs on, and it's a real threat, and it's something we need to do, take care of right now.
Bob Baer, appreciate it. David Susie, Richard Quest, Paul Krushenko as well. Just ahead tonight is